In this video, we'll learn how to control the lighting that we use to texture our MARI assets. Alright, great. So again, I've got this very simple project on my screen here, and I'm not opening up the fully textured assassin just yet because I think that some of these early videos are better suited to just a simple flat gray asset. So the thing I want to talk to you about in this particular video is lighting. Now, for a texture artist painting really in any texturing application, lighting is critical because the lighting changes and how we perceive the textures that we're painting on our 3D asset change. So now when we are thinking about lighting here inside of MARI, if we look at sort of the qualities of this mesh we see on the canvas right now, you can see here there are specular highlights. We have some shadows, it looks like. So we have a lot of information as a result of the lights that exist here inside of our project. Now, when you're painting, sometimes it can be difficult. Sometimes you are looking at an area, say maybe this area right here in her head, and you're trying to paint maybe some skin texture right there, and there's a large specular highlight in the way. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the lighting toolbar. And it's actually open right now. It's right up here, these four circles or spheres right here. And you can see by default this third one is depressed. So what this indicates is that we're looking at our asset on the canvas with full lighting. This means we have both shadows and specular highlights on the surfaces of our mesh. Now, this again can be a problem. It can be something that we have to basically fight against when we're trying to paint textures. So we have two other options here. We have a basic lighting, which we can enable, and you can see here basically what that does is it gets rid of those really big sharp specular highlights. So really all we're looking at is some shadowing on the surfaces of the mesh. And of course we can use this last one here on the far left, which is basic, or excuse me, it's flat lighting. So if we were to select that one, really what it looks like now is we're just looking kind of at a gray silhouette of the mesh. But this is something that I find myself using quite a bit because I want to see what the raw color information looks like without the influence of the lighting that I have set up. So these are really, really important to understand because you'll be cycling back and forth between these three different lighting modes a number of times while you're working on a particular asset. So this fourth sphere is a little different. This is for shadows, and I know you're thinking to yourself, well, we have shadows, but basically the geometry in our scene is not casting shadows. And you can see that illustrated here if we look kind of underneath this bandana, kind of against her body mesh here. There's no shadow, no contact shadow where that particular geometry is resting against the other. So this is something that MARI is capable of doing, but by default we can't click on this particular icon here. As a matter of fact, if we just mouse over this, what you'll see is that in MARI's preferences we need to enable depth projections to use this feature. Now this is cool that MARI supports this and can do this, but I typically leave this turned off because I don't necessarily need to see cast shadows in order to generate some high quality textures for an asset. Alright, great. So let's dive deep into the lighting here. We've talked about the lighting modes, but we still have kind of a set default illumination here. You can see as we orbit around, we kind of have everything receiving kind of this really prominent, kind of neutral illumination, meaning that everything can be seen, nothing is in shadow. So let's jump up here. We're going to right click and open up our lights palette here. Now, that's going to open up over here on the left because that's the last place I had it docked in at. And you can see we have 5 different lights here inside of our lights palette. The first one here is an environment light. And for the purpose of what we're looking at right now on our canvas, this isn't doing a thing. Because if I were to just left click on that and select it, you'll see all the options for the environment light, and we can scroll down here and we can see here that this environment light needs an image to be plugged into it, and I don't have that. So this light is currently not emitting anything at this point. We could actually come over and click on that little sphere next to it and turn it off, and you'll see nothing different here on the canvas. So the illumination that we're receiving right now is a result of these 4 lights right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 basically point lights that exist inside of our scene. Now we can left click on these guys and we can select them, and we can even come in and begin to maybe turn them off, turn them back on if we want to, kind of figure out which one is where. Looking for one that's kind of on the front orientation. There we are. So you can see where that light is in relation to our mesh. And we can come over here and we can begin to change things like position and really start to customize these things. We can tap this R button here to reset that light back to its default position. But in my experience, when you're working inside of Mari, you can absolutely use these 4-point lights as neutral lighting setup if you want to. But I like to texture my assets with an HDR image, whether that is maybe an HDR dome that's been shot in the environment this asset's going to appear in, or maybe just a variety of different HDRs to make sure my textures all look good under really any lighting circumstances. So let's come in here and just turn off all of these default lights, just like so. And you can see we're just down to the flat color. We'll go ahead and turn on our environment light, and now you can see everything went black. But let's jump down here, and we'll just pull this out to the right just a bit. I'm going to scroll down, and we're going to pull in an image. Now we can do this a few different ways. We can come in and we can click on this button here to bring up Mari's file browser and load in an image. We can actually click on this X right here, and that's going to bring this dialog up. Now this dialog has a bunch of different HDRs we can use for lighting in our scene. So if we came in here and maybe selected this first one on the left and clicked OK, you can see what we're looking at now is kind of an HDR dome that's surrounding our mesh. Now with this particular image, it just so happens that our light source is kind of behind the asset. So we're not getting a good amount of illumination on the front side here. So if this is an image I was wanting to use, one of the most used parameters here inside this particular palette for me is the rotation control. So we can come over here and we can begin to rotate that image around so we can move the light source so that we get the illumination we need where we want it. Another thing that I will do oftentimes is jump in here and I will, instead of having the background shown, I'll just hide that. And that means I get the same amount of illumination, except now I still have that neutral background, and I can still focus clearly on the textures for my asset without being distracted by an image that may be in the background. So let's come in here and take a look. Again, it's important when you're texturing an asset, if you do not have a specific HDR dome that you're using for your asset, to maybe come in and look at your textures under a number of different lighting circumstances here. You can see this particular image looks to be in sort of a parking garage where we've got a lot of artificial light. And you can kind of see that reflected here on the surfaces of the model. We have some basic studio lighting setups here and here. If you want to prefer to texture using something like that, you could absolutely do that. And again, using that rotation here is going to be important. We can also come up here if it's not enough illumination for us, and we can begin to drive up the intensity of that HDR. So you can see how that gets brighter or dimmer depending on what our needs are. All right, great. Now, one thing that I like to do, I mentioned, is bring in an HDR image maybe for a particular shot that I'm working on, or maybe it's an environment that this asset is going to appear in. And I want to show you how that works. Now, if you check your project files for this course, inside your referenced files folder, there's an images folder, and I've included some HDR images for you here. So we can either use this button to browse to those, or we can simply just drag them over and drop them onto this little square right here. So we'll go ahead and drag one of those up, and there you can see. Let me just go ahead and show my background. So you can see the HDR image that we're using now at this point. So this is kind of an overcast day in a residential neighborhood, kind of neutral lighting, but it is outdoor lighting. We can come over here, maybe use this image here, drag it over. This is an interior lighting shot from inside the office. And let me go ahead and grab this one here. This is one that I like a lot. It was shot during a bright sunny day on the top of a parking garage, and we have some really good illumination here. So this is how you can begin to use image-based lighting for your texturing needs here inside of MARI. And most of the time when I'm working in MARI, this is the light source I'm using. I'm not necessarily going for this default lighting because I find that this default lighting just doesn't translate all that well into the needs I have for the textures once they are rendered out.